Hello, my friends. So today I have a little story from history that I'd like to relate to you. And this story, I think, is an excellent case study for how influential Judeo-mystic religion was in Europe as far back as the 1700s, and especially how that influence seemed to go as far up as the highest ranks of the European aristocracy, including kings, as we'll see, or at least one particular king that we will see. And this Judeo-mystic group that I'm going to be focusing on today is the Sabbateans. And this particular event is called the Sabbatean controversy between a rabbi called Jacob Emden and Jonathan Eybeschutz. And just to give you some background in case you are unfamiliar with the Sabbateans, there I'll link a couple videos introducing the Sabbateans in a pretty comprehensive way. I think Robert Sepper has done one, and you should check those out. But essentially, the Sabbateans were a group of antinomian Jews that believed that in order to bring about the kingdom of God on earth, the millennium, the 1,000 year reign of God on earth, then really there were only two options for humans to be perfectly good or perfectly evil. And so they believed that their law essentially is to repudiate and transgress all laws. Uh, Sabbateanism began with Sabbatai Zevi, and I'm not going to go too much into this history here because you can look at the video that I'll link, but Sabbatai Zevi was extremely influential. It says here, Jewish historians have stated that it is hard to describe the national sense of shock and trauma that set in when the masses of Jews all over the world learned that someone as famous as Sabbatai Zevi had officially abandoned his faith for Islam. Sabbatai Zevi converted to Islam and taught his believers that they should also convert to other religions while secretly practicing Sabbatean Judaism in order to subvert those religions. And this was in the 1600s, the mid to late 1600s. But in the 1700s, when our story takes place, a new Messiah claimant, Jacob Frank, had already taken up the torch that was lit by Sabbatai Zevi. And it says, just to give you a brief understanding of Frankism, which Frankism is basically just an extension of Sabbateanism, Frank rejected religious norms and said his followers were obligated to transgress as many moral boundaries as possible. At its height, it claimed perhaps 500,000 followers, probably more. And essentially, Frank claimed that all laws and teachings will fail, and following antinomianism, which is the rejection of laws, he asserted that the most important obligation of every person was the transgression of every boundary. It says here, Frankism is associated with the Sabbateans, a religious movement that identified the 17th century Jewish rabbi Sabbatai Zevi as the Messiah. Like Frankism, the earlier forms of Sabbateanism believed that, at least in some circumstances, antinomianism was the correct path. They would perform actions that violated traditional taboos. So essentially, Sabbateanism and Frankism called for the inversion of all laws. So if the Bible says thou shalt not commit adultery, then what you ought to do is commit adultery. They had massive wife swapping parties. It says here, orgies, sexual orgies featured prominently in rituals in Frankism. And so any law you could think of, thou shalt not murder, becomes thou shalt murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery becomes thou shalt commit adultery, and so on. And it's amazing that this is not really understood in modern history, because I think that this sort of idealism, this sort of ideology of the Frankists and Sabbateans could help to explain why so many Hollywood figures and politicians today are so degenerate. But the question really is, how influential and how powerful were these Jewish mystics? And that that issue is what I would like to at least give some kind of answer to through this story that I'm about to tell you. I think this is an excellent case study in how widespread and powerful this sect was. So let's return to Jacob Emden's page. Jacob Emden was a leading German rabbi and Talmudist who championed Orthodox Judaism in the face of the growing influence of the Sabbatean movement. Okay? And I'll just read this section on the Sabbatean controversy, or parts of it. So Jacob Emden accused Jonathan Eybeschutz of being a secret Sabbatean. The controversy lasted several years, continuing even after Eybeschutz' death. Eybeschutz was named the chief rabbi of the three communities, Altona, Hamburg, and Wandsbek. And the controversy reached a stage of bitter and intense antagonism at this point. So Emden essentially saw certain amulets, certain writings, and teachings within Eybeschutz' school as Sabbatean, as alluding to, in sort of an indirect way, to Sabbatean ideas. And so Emden called out Eybeschutz and said, "You are a Sabbatean. I don't like you. We should excommunicate you." And he even accused Eybeschutz of having an incestuous relationship with his own daughter and fathering a child with her. So this is the sort of thing that the Sabbateans would do: incest, orgies, wife swapping, ritual murders. That is really what you should expect from someone like the Sabbateans, from people like the Sabbateans who wanted to transgress every moral boundary. And interestingly, this is just one little side note here, one of the people that favored Eybeschutz and defended him was named Epstein. Just a small little detail there. I'm sure he has no relation to any of the Epsteins that we know today. But anyway, so the majority of the community favored Eybeschutz. Eybeschutz was a very powerful and rich rabbi. People were ordered under pain of excommunication not to attend Emden's synagogue, Emden the one who's trying to call out the Sabbatean. And he himself was forbidden to issue anything from his press. As Emden continued his philippics against Eybeschutz, he was ordered by the council of the three communities to leave Altona. This he refused to do, relying on the strength of the king's charter, and he was, as he maintained, relentlessly persecuted. His life seeming to be in actual danger, in May of 1751, he left the town and took refuge in Amsterdam, where he had many friends and where he joined the household of his brother-in-law. Emden's cause was subsequently taken up by the court of Frederick V of Denmark, and on June the 3rd, 1752, a judgment was given in favor of Emden, severely censoring the council of the three communities and condemning them to a fine of $100. So I want to stop there and just think of the wording of this Wikipedia page. Severely censoring the councils of the three communities and condemning them to a fine of $100. I made a tweet the other day asking people if they had any idea how we could convert $100 in mid 1700s currency to modern day currency. And it turns out that $100 is really only about 3,000, 4,000, somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 in today's money, which to these extremely wealthy chief rabbis is basically nothing more than a slap on the wrist. So the idea that they were severely censored is a little absurd. $100 is basically nothing to these people. So this was a token slap on the wrist given by Frederick V of Denmark. And we'll come back to Frederick V of Denmark because he's one of the kings that I think is very suspicious here. But anyway, I wanted to explore a little more about the Sabbateans. It turns out Eybeschutz was a Sabbatean. His son, Wolf Eybeschutz, came out after his father's death and openly declared himself to be a Sabbatean. And later on, it turns out that Eybeschutz' school that he held, that he was the chief of, also taught Sabbatean ideas. So it's pretty clear that Eybeschutz himself was a Sabbatean. And here's the page on Eybeschutz. He was a Talmudist, a Kabbalist. His granddaughter, Lucy, think of that name, Lucy. She changed her name to Lucy from Esther. I wonder why she chose Lucy, if you understand the sort of satanic connotations of Lucy. But interestingly, Eybeschutz' grandson was rumored to be Baron Thomas von Schoenfeld, an apostate Jew who inherited his grandfather's collection of Sabbatean Kabbalistic works. He eventually left the Sabbatean movement and founded a Masonic lodge called the the Asiatic Brothers, or Brotherhood, one of the 4 Illuminati lodges in Vienna. Upon his uncle's death, in August 10th, 1791, his uncle was Jacob Frank. He was offered the leadership of the Frankist movement, which he refused. Katz disputes this claim, however. Katz, this scholar that's doing work on this particular history, disputes this claim, saying that Baron Thomas von Schoenfeld was a member of the Debruce family of Brunn and was in no way related either by blood or marriage to Rabbi Eybeschutz. According to Gershom Scholem, the ideology of the Asiatic Brethren mixed Kabbalistic and Sabbatean ideas jumbled together with Christian theosophic doctrines. So Gershom Scholem, this Jewish scholar, identifies the Asiatic Brethren, an Illuminati lodge, as having an ideology which mixed Kabbalistic, Sabbatean, and Christian theosophic doctrines. And if you know anything I've done about the ideology behind the UN, the United Nations, we know that theosophy is involved. We know that Kabbalism and Sabbatean ideas are right in there as well. So here we see that the Sabbateans went on to influence the creation of the Illuminati lodges, which, if you know anything about, conspiratorial history, then right away we have a connection to people like the Rothschilds. And here's just another page that talks about the Debruce Schoenfeld family associated with the Sabbatean movement. Shundel Debruce was known as the patron of Moravian Sabbateans and was a close friend of Wolf Eybeschutz. Rabbi Jacob Emden, who reserved for her the epithet the Great Whore of Brunn, portrayed her as the spiritus movens of Sabbateanism in Moravia. She was a maternal cousin of Jacob Frank, who reportedly sometimes used the name Debruce himself. An anonymous denunciation against the Bohemian Frankists sent in 1799 to the mayor of Prague states that during Frank's funeral in Offenbach in 1791, Moses Debruce was offered the leadership of the sect but declined and instead went to France to take part in the revolution. So not only do we have connections of the Sabbateans to the Illuminati lodges of Bavaria, Germany, but also to the French Revolution. And here's the page on Moses Debruce. He was an alchemist, of course, and always the alchemists, the Kabbalists, the Theosophists, the Rosicrucians, all of these mystical traditions intertwine. They're basically just different names, different sects of one overarching Judeo-mystic ideology. And here it shows Moses Debruce elevated to nobility in Vienna, becoming Franz Thomas Elder von Schoenfeld. And together with Ephraim Joseph Hirschfeld, became one of the main conspirators of the Knights of St. John the Evangelists for Asia and Europe, which the shortened name was the Asiatic Brotherhood, which was much talked about in Germany and Austria between 1783 and 1790, not least because it was the first German-speaking fraternal order to accept Jews. He went in the wake of the French Revolution to Paris, became a Jacobin, changed his name again to Junius Frey. These shapeshifters love changing their names. And the new name derived from Junius, from the Roman Juni family that fostered the famous tyrant slayers of Brutus, blah blah blah. He was arrested for treason and espionage and executed by guillotine. Which, was he really? I'm not sure. He might have just faked his death. A lot of these people fake their deaths. But another interesting part of Eybeschutz, one of his descendants, Chava Rosenfarb, married the Canadian abortion activist Dr. Henry Morgenthaler, who was a big-time advocate for abortion. Ironically, they did not abort their own daughter, though. They should have. Anyway, so we already can see from this small bit of history, this controversy between Emden and Eybeschutz, that Eybeschutz and Sabbateanism was connected with German nobility, the Illuminati lodges in Germany, and the Illuminati lodges in Germany, by the way, according to Rabbi Marvin Antelman in his To Eliminate the Opiate, which is a book you could find on Amazon, written in the 70s, Rabbi Antelman said that the founder of the Rothschild dynasty convinced Weishaupt to accept the Frankist doctrine, and who afterwards financed the Illuminati with the aim of fulfilling the Frankist plot of subverting the world's religions, or the Kabbalah's Zionist objective of instituting a global government to be ruled by the expected Messiah. And this, I mean, this is highly plausible. We have to understand how influential the Frankist Sabbatean movement was at the time to the Jews. This guy was held by Jews all across the world to be the Messiah. He was taken very seriously. And the Rothschilds obviously are the big-time chief Jews of today. They're the ones who made the I forget what it's called. It's the let's actually look it up. Rothschilds, Zionism. The Balfour Declaration, that's what it was, where Lord Balfour presented Lord Rothschild, delivering a letter by hand stating that the Brits, the Anglos, the eternal Anglos, would support the Zionist Jews in the creation of Israel. So today, the chief Jews, Rothschilds, I think they have been handed the torch. They're the ones who are holding the torch now. That was given to them by Jacob Frank, who was just extraordinarily powerful at his time. He lived like a king. He was also made an aristocrat. And his whole ideology was moral transgression, subverting other religions by converting to other religions and secretly practicing Sabbateanism so that you could take them down from the inside. And this is just history that I think needs to be understood and dealt with. But interestingly, let's go back to Frederick V of Denmark, which I already have a page open of him. Frederick V of Denmark was the king that severely censored the chief rabbis of the three communities by charging them a petty fine of $100. Remember how one of the main important tenets of Sabbateanism was orgies? Ritualistic orgies? Well, it turns out that Frederick V of Denmark was involved in constant orgies. It says here, although the king as regent took part in the conduct of government by attending council meetings, he was afflicted by alcoholism, and most of his rule was dominated by very able ministers, such as A.G. Moltke, whom he had as a favorite, J.H.E. Bernstorff, and H.C. Schlimmelmann. The king is surrounded by Jewish banking merchant advisors, while the king goes on all day having orgies and drinking. One of his main tasks was, one of Moltke, his advisors' main tasks was to take care that his dissolute majesty didn't damage the royal household's reputation with his constant orgies. Quite interesting. And Frederick V was an active Freemason who set up the first Masonic lodge in Norway. So we see the Sabbateans infiltrating, creating, subverting Masonic lodges in Germany, and now we see this orgiastic, degenerate King Frederick V of Denmark setting up the first Masonic lodge in Norway. Also, turns out, one of these top advisors of King Frederick V, Schlimmelmann, he was a forgerer. He speculated heavily on currency debasement. I think he was a crypto, for sure. But really interesting is that his wife, Caroline von Schlimmelmann, says, quote, her spouse had an important role within the Danish government, her spouse being the banker Schlimmelmann, and the couple became central figures within the Danish aristocracy. The masquerade balls hosted by the Schlimmelmann couple in their palace in Copenhagen belonged to the foremost centers of Danish society in the 1760s, and these balls were later blamed to have encouraged Queen Caroline Matilda's adultery with Struensee. He was another high-ranking official. So we see the upper aristocracy of Denmark involved in masquerade balls wherein the queen is being encouraged to commit adultery? Is it possible that these people were crypto Jews that were Sabbatean Frankists? It would be a very strange coincidence if there wasn't a connection there. And at the same time as all this is happening, you get these Hellfire clubs popping up in Europe, which also involve like the worship of the devil. They call themselves the devils. You have high-ranking aristocrats in England being involved in this, involved in orgies, sexual rituals. They're also connected with the Masons. Their club motto was "Do what thou wilt," a philosophy of life associated with Thelema and later used by Aleister Crowley, a consummate spook, intelligence agent, spook. So there are a lot of connections between the Sabbateans, between the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the intelligence community with Aleister Crowley and his degenerate satanic ideology, the fact that these Hellfire clubs are popping up at the same time. And this is all mainstream history that just doesn't really get talked about. Also interesting is that the Rothschilds were almost certainly involved. As Antleman suggests here. So, I think I had one other thing to show you. Wealthy Jewish family. These people were all super wealthy, super well connected. And as you can see, the European aristocracy was compromised a long time ago. We need to be extremely suspicious of people connected with the aristocracy. Not just openly practicing Judeo worshippers, but also just people in power in general. You could see that this was relatively normal for aristocrats to be engaging in at this time. And one has to wonder how this is just a coincidence. If the Sabbatean influence wasn't there, how could this just be a coincidence? So, just a bit of history for you. If you enjoyed this, then perhaps I'll do a live stream where we can do some live research together. I think that would be quite interesting to go down a few rabbit holes here, because there are many rabbit holes to go down. Oh, here's a picture I found of the Rothschilds masquerade ball. So we see how these masquerade balls, and of course everyone knows about, the Eyes Wide Shut masquerade party. Kubrick was trying to warn us. So that's it for today. To summarize, we can see how the Sabbatean Frankist movement was connected with high levels of aristocracy, extraordinarily wealthy individuals. We see how it was connected with the Illuminati, with Christian theosophy, which has been involved with the creation of the UN. And just think about, the next time you think about how degenerate Hollywood is, or how degenerate politicians are, the pedophilia, the orgies, the wife swapping, the infidelity, the all the degenerate things that they are involved in. Just think about the Sabbateans and wonder if they were perhaps Sabbateans themselves. I know even a U.S. Supreme Court judge, Louis Brandeis, was a Frankist, which Wikipedia just describes as, in their religious beliefs, although his family was Jewish, only his extended family practiced a more conservative form of Judaism, while his parents practiced a more relaxed form called Frankism. It's hilarious to refer to Sabbatean Frankism as a relaxed form of Judaism. And this guy was a Supreme Court judge. So, just a few points to explore here. I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you for watching.